The click of Victoria's designer heels echoed through the executive floor as she watched security lead me to the elevator, a triumphant smile playing across her perfectly painted lips. Behind her, my father stood in his office doorway, silent and unmoving, just as he'd been throughout my entire childhood. "I told you this would happen eventually," Victoria called after me. "You never belonged here, Olivia. You're just the help's daughter playing dress-up in a world that isn't yours." My name is Olivia Martinez, and at 29, I was being publicly humiliated and fired from Martinez Technologies, the company my father built, the company where I'd worked my way up from intern to director of operations over the past 8 years. All because my stepmother had finally found a way to get rid of me. The security guard, James, looked apologetic as he pressed the elevator button. He'd known me since I was a teenager, had watched me grow up in these halls. "I'm sorry, Miss Olivia," he whispered. "This isn't right." I squeezed his arm gently. "It's okay, James. Everything happens for a reason." Victoria's laugh followed me into the elevator. "Don't forget to clean out your desk. Though there's probably nothing worth keeping, just like your mother." As the doors closed, I caught one last glimpse of my father, still standing there, still saying nothing. Some things never changed. My mother had been a housekeeper for the Martinez family when she met my father. Their romance had scandalized Houston's elite social circles, the wealthy businessmen falling for the help. But they'd married anyway, and for a few brief years, we'd been happy. Then Mom got sick. Cancer. She died when I was 10, and within a year, Victoria had swooped in with her designer wardrobe and social connections, determined to erase any trace of the woman who came before her. I made my way to my office, former office now, ignoring the shocked stares and whispers of my colleagues. My team looked devastated. They knew what this meant. Victoria would replace me with someone of her choosing, probably one of her socialite friends' children who knew nothing about actually running a company. Ms. Martinez, my assistant Sarah, approached, tears in her eyes. "We heard what happened. It's not fair. You've done more for this company than anyone." I started packing my personal items into a box, keeping my movements calm and deliberate. "Life isn't always fair, Sarah. But sometimes what seems like an ending is actually a beginning." "What will you do?" she asked, helping me pack. I pulled a small leather notebook from my desk drawer, my mother's old recipe book, the one thing of hers I kept with me always. But it wasn't just recipes inside. Between the pages of family dishes were other notes, other plans, ones Victoria never knew about. "Don't worry about me," I said, smiling slightly. "I've been preparing for this day longer than Victoria realizes." The truth was, I'd known this was coming. Victoria had been trying to push me out for years, but I'd been too good at my job, too valuable to the company's success for her to find a reason. Until now. She finally managed to frame me for financial misconduct. Doctored documents, falsified signatures, a perfect paper trail that made it look like I'd been embezzling company funds. It was expertly done. I had to admire her thoroughness, even as it made my blood boil. What Victoria didn't know was that I'd been documenting everything. Every illegal transaction she'd made, every penny she'd siphoned from the company accounts, every shady deal she'd orchestrated behind my father's back. I'd learned from my mother that sometimes the best defense was patience, observation, and meticulous record-keeping. As I walked out of Martinez Technologies for what felt like the last time, I pulled out my phone and dialed a familiar number. "Daniel? It's time. Are you ready?" Daniel Chen had been my best friend since college and was now one of the top corporate lawyers in Houston. He'd been helping me build my case against Victoria for the past 2 years. "Everything's ready," he confirmed. "The evidence is solid. Are you sure you want to do this? Once we start, there's no going back." I paused on the sidewalk, looking up at the gleaming tower that housed my father's company, my family's legacy. "I'm sure," I said firmly. "Victoria thinks she's won, that she's finally gotten rid of the embarrassing reminder of my father's first marriage. But she's about to learn that underestimating me was the biggest mistake she could have made." That evening, I sat in my apartment reviewing everything we gathered. The documentation was damning. Offshore accounts, fraudulent contracts, years of financial manipulation that would make any auditor's head spin. Victoria had been treating the company like her personal piggy bank, all while maintaining her image as the perfect corporate wife. My phone buzzed with messages from my team. Expressions of support, offers to quit and protest, promises to help however they could. I appreciated their loyalty but told them to stay put. I needed eyes and ears inside the company for what was coming next. A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. When I opened it, I found Maria, one of the company's longtime cleaning staff, and my mother's best friend. Menina, she said, pulling me into a tight hug. I just heard that witch finally did it. I hugged her back, breathing in the familiar scent of her perfume, the same one my mother used to wear. It's okay, Maria. I'm okay. She pulled back, studying my face with knowing eyes. You have that look, the same one your mother used to get when she was planning something. What are you going to do? I led her inside, showing her the files spread across my dining room table. Everything Victoria never wanted anyone to find. Every corrupt deal, every stolen dollar, every lie she's told my father and the board. Maria's eyes widened as she looked through the documents. Dios mío, how long have you been collecting this? Since the day I overheard her talking about getting rid of me, I said, remembering that moment 2 years ago when I accidentally stumbled upon Victoria's phone conversation. She said I was an embarrassment to the family name, that she'd never rest until I was gone. Like your mother, Maria said quietly. She did the same thing to Anna, made her life so difficult that she felt she had to quit, even before she got sick. I hadn't known that. Another piece of the puzzle, another reason to make sure Victoria faced consequences for her actions. Manana, Maria continued, is the annual board meeting. Victoria's been bragging to everyone about her big presentation, how she's going to announce changes that will modernize the company. I smiled. I know. And she has no idea that while she's been planning my downfall, I've been planning something much bigger. The next morning, I dressed carefully in my best suit, the one my father had given me when I was promoted to director of operations. Victoria might think I was just the maid's daughter, but I was also Richard Martinez's daughter, and it was time everyone remembered that. I checked my phone, messages from Daniel confirming everything was in place, updates from my allies inside the company, and one missed call from my father. I ignored it. He'd had years to stand up for me, to see what his wife was doing. His silence had been his choice. As I grabbed my keys and the thick file of evidence we compiled, I caught my reflection in the mirror. I saw my mother's eyes looking back at me, determined, fierce, unafraid. She taught me to stand up for myself, to fight for what was right. Victoria was about to learn exactly what that meant. Game on, I whispered, heading out the door. It was time to take back everything Victoria thought she could steal from me, my job, my reputation, and my family's legacy. The Martinez Technologies boardroom was on the top floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the Houston skyline. As I rode up in the service elevator, the only way I could enter without being stopped by security, I thought about how many times I'd sat in that room, presenting quarterly reports while Victoria watched me like a hawk, waiting for me to make a mistake. Ready? Daniel texted. Born ready. I replied. Maria had let me in through the service entrance, just like she used to do when I was a kid visiting my father at work. Now she gave me a fierce hug before pointing me toward the private stairwell that led to the executive floor. Your mother would be so proud, she whispered. I checked my watch, 9:55 a.m. Victoria would be starting her presentation at 10 o'clock, announcing my crimes to the board and presenting her plan to save the company from further corruption. The irony would have been funny if it hadn't been so infuriating. Through the crack in the boardroom door, I could see them assembling. The board members in their expensive suits, my father at the head of the table, and Victoria standing at the front, perfect as always in her designer dress and pearls. She was smiling that smile I knew so well, the one that meant she thought she'd won. At exactly 10 o'clock, she began. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, her voice carried clearly through the door. I've called this emergency meeting to address a serious situation. As you may have heard, yesterday we were forced to terminate Olivia Martinez's employment due to evidence of significant financial misconduct. Murmurs rippled through the room. I could see some board members shaking their heads. They'd worked with me for years, trusted me. I know this comes as a shock, Victoria continued, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. We all wanted to believe in Richard's daughter, despite her humble origins. But the evidence is clear. She clicked to the first slide of her presentation. Doctored bank statements and forged documents that made it look like I'd been stealing from the company for years. That was my cue. I pushed open the boardroom doors, Daniel right behind me, and walked in as if I owned the place. You're right about one thing, Victoria. The evidence is very clear. The room erupted in chaos. Victoria's face went pale, then red with fury. Security, she shouted. This is a private meeting. Actually, Daniel stepped forward, placing his briefcase on the table. As the company's legal counsel, I've invited Ms. Martinez to present some evidence of her own. My father finally spoke, his voice tired. Olivia, what are you doing here? Something I should have done a long time ago, I replied, meeting his gaze. Showing you the truth about your wife. Victoria laughed, but I could hear the nervousness behind it. This is ridiculous. The board has already seen the evidence of her crimes. Viewing these, I pulled out copies of the documents she used to frame me. The ones with forged signatures and doctored dates. Interesting how the timestamps on all the digital files show they were created last week, isn't it? The board members started shuffling through their copies, looking more closely at the dates. But that's not why I'm here. I continued, pulling out my own file. I'm here to show the board exactly what Victoria has been doing with company money for the past 5 years. What followed was the most satisfying 30 minutes of my life. Screen by screen, document by document, I laid out Victoria's years of corruption. The offshore accounts, the fake consulting firms she created to funnel money to herself, the kickbacks from vendors. The evidence was overwhelming and ironclad. This is nonsense, Victoria sputtered, but her perfect composure was cracking. Richard, are you going to let her do this to me? To us? My father sat there, looking older than I'd ever seen him. Is this true, Victoria? Of course not. She's lying just like her mother always did. The words hung in the air like poison. I saw my father flinch, saw real anger cross his face for the first time. Don't, he said quietly. Don't you dare speak about Anna that way. Victoria must have realized her mistake because she quickly changed tactics. Richard, darling, she's just trying to cause trouble. You know how she's always been jealous of our relationship. Like you were jealous of my mother. I cut in. Jealous enough to make her life so miserable that she quit her job here. Maria told me everything, Victoria. How you tormented her, spread rumors about her, even before she got sick. Maria? Victoria's eyes narrowed. The cleaning woman? You're believing gossip from servants now. No, I said calmly. I'm believing the evidence. Like this recorded conversation from last month. I played the audio file, Victoria's own voice discussing her plans to frame me to get rid of the embarrassing reminder of my father's first marriage once and for all. The color drained from her face as her own words filled the room. My father stood up slowly, his hands shaking. Get out, he said to Victoria. Richard, get out. His voice cracked like thunder. Security will escort you from the building. The police have already been notified about the fraud. Victoria looked around wildly, but found no allies. The board members were already going through the evidence, their faces grim. She grabbed her bag and ran from the room, her perfect composure finally shattered. In the silence that followed, my father turned to me. Olivia, Don't, I said softly. Not now. There's still work to do. The next few hours were a blur of police statements, emergency board meetings, and damage control. Victoria was arrested trying to board a private plane to the Cayman Islands. The company's legal team worked overtime to recover the stolen funds. My reputation was formally cleared. A week later, I sat in my old office, my office again, looking out over the city. A knock at the door made me turn. Got a minute? My father asked. I nodded, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. He sat down heavily, looking somehow both older and lighter than he had in years. I failed you, he said simply. I failed your mother. I let Victoria poison everything because I was too weak to see what was happening. Yes, I agreed, you did. He nodded, accepting the truth of it. I can't change the past. But I want you to know, your mother would be so proud of you, not just for exposing Victoria, but for everything you've built here, everything you've become. I felt tears prick at my eyes but held them back. I learned from her. She taught me to be strong, to fight for what's right. Even when she was sick, she never stopped fighting. She did, he smiled sadly. And she gave that strength to you. We sat in silence for a moment, years of unspoken words hanging between us. The board wants to make you CEO, he said finally. They've lost faith in my judgment, and frankly, I don't blame them. The company needs new leadership. Better leadership. I stared at him stunned. Dad, you earned it, Olivia. Not because you're my daughter, but because you're the best person for the job. You protected this company when I couldn't. You deserve to lead it. 2 months later, I stood in front of the company's employees, making my first speech as CEO of Martinez Technologies. The changes we'd made were already showing results: transparency initiatives, new ethical guidelines, a foundation to provide educational opportunities for employees' children. As I looked out over the crowd, I saw Maria beaming proudly from the back. I saw my old team, now in leadership positions they'd earned. I saw my father, retired but finally present in a way he hadn't been for years. And in my mind, I saw my mother, not the way she looked when she was sick, but the way she was when I was small. Strong, loving, unafraid to stand up for what was right. Victoria had thought she could erase us, the maid and her daughter, the embarrassing reminder of a past she wanted to forget. Instead, she'd only made us stronger. Sometimes justice comes not in grand gestures, but in quiet moments of truth. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying your enemies, but about building something better from the ashes of what they tried to destroy. As I finished my speech and the applause filled the room, I touched the small recipe book in my pocket, my mother's legacy, now mine to carry forward. Victoria had never understood that true strength doesn't come from money or status or power. It comes from knowing who you are and standing firm in that truth, no matter what storms come your way.